Good afternoon, dear guest. Welcome to MURCIR Book Launch Series. As you know, in the last year, we started to continue our activities with book launch. One of the most important missions of MURCIR is not only producing through several field research, but also distribution of this knowledge and produced let's say the results of the researchers in international relations and the political science academia. So today we have a very prominent researcher in our book launch series, Professor Charis Psaltis from University of Cyprus. He is Professor of Social and Developmental Sociology, and today he will present his latest book, Conflict and Change, Integrating Social and Developmental Psychology. It will be also a kind of discussion about Greek and Turkish Cypriots perspective. So I'm sure it will be very, very interesting discussion in our series. Welcome, dear Charis, to our series.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation, Zuhal. It's a great honor for me to be in a position to present this work. The book was actually published last December, a few months ago, by Cambridge University Press. And what this book does is that it's comprised of two parts. The first part is more theoretical, where I try to integrate social psychology of intergroup relations with developmental psychology. And in that sense, I will explain what this means. It's an approach that I call an interdisciplinary approach of genetic social psychology. And in the second part of the book, there are various commentaries by different colleagues, both social psychologists and developmental psychologists from all around the world, who try to take a position on the ideas presented. As you will see here, beyond the theoretical discussion, which I will only touch very superficially today, there is also some other chapters where I present the Cyprus case, and the case of presenting empirical evidence from both communities in Cyprus through large-scale representative surveys. So, as you will see in a bit, we have been doing research in Cyprus since the opening of the checkpoints until today, with large-scale representative surveys, trying to understand the views of both the Greek Cypriot community and the Turkish Cypriot community in terms of the solution of the Cyprus problem, whether contact takes place between the two communities and with what effects, because there is a big theory in social psychology called contact hypothesis, suggesting that under certain conditions, contact could lead to the reduction of prejudice and the building of trust. So the opening of checkpoints, that was a very important point in Cyprus. I will talk more about that a bit later on. But also more politically related questions, like what position do the two communities take on bizonal, bicommunal federation? That was the agreed form of solution since 1977 by Makarios and Denktash, and it's supported by a series of UN resolutions. How do people feel about that today? How did they feel 5 years ago? How did they feel 20 years ago? So there is the trend, the changing trend on that, about unitary state, about two states, about the continuation of the status quo. And I also have some research findings from joint work with my colleague in your field, Neophytos Loizidis at Warwick University, on political design, where we joined forces to examine what kind of specific peace packages people could be ready to accept if we move on towards a solution very soon in Cyprus. So just to go back, one might ask, okay, this is like mostly psychological work that combines social and developmental psychology. So how can it be of value to ongoing discussions about finding a solution to the Cyprus problem? What is the proposal here in the book of genetic social psychology, and how can it answer questions like, is the current equilibrium in Cyprus truly comfortable or not? Is there a way out of the current impasse? Is there a way? What is the will of the two communities in terms of moving forward? So these are a bit of the questions that I think would be also value to your Department of Political Sciences. So let me touch firstly on some more theoretical questions. So as I said, we are trying to combine ideas from social psychology and the study of intergroup relations. So, the study of xenophobia, racism, trust, the role of contact in prejudice reduction, how people understand the history of the conflict and how that changes their current perceptions and future perceptions of the problem. And there is a divide in our field between social and developmental psychology because usually these two subfields of psychology don't come together. But in what I'm proposing as genetic social psychology, there is a marriage between these two subdisciplines because we are interested in the study of the social psychological subject and its development through time. So the core aim is not just to describe the phenomena, but also to understand their better nature through their study of how they get transformed and the mechanisms that change this phenomena. So to be more specific, we are interested in three specific processes of change. The first is sociogenetic change. So what is sociogenetic change? Sociogenetic change is how our views, our beliefs, our ideas, our values about a certain topic, in our case it is the Cyprus issue, change through historical time. For example, how do our views of what is the Cyprus issue evolving in historical time? Do we have as the middle-aged people have the same views of the Cyprus issue compared to Generation Z, the younger generation? What about our view compared to the older generation, my parents' generation, for example? So these are questions that we are dealing with. And you understand, in the case of a protracted conflict like the Cyprus issue, this becomes really important because the Cyprus issue is not a static problem. It changes through time, and so we need to understand these changes as they move along. Then we have the ontogenetic dimension, which is the more developmental perspective on the topic. Because in a protracted conflict, the educational system usually plays a role in socializing the new generation into their ideas. So obviously, we cannot say that the views of a 5-year-old about the other community or Turkey are the same with an adolescent or an adult or somebody 80 years old. So in that sense, this is the ontogenetic dimension we are interested in, how through changing developmental time, the views are changing. And then it's the third one, what we call microgenesis, which is actually the role of dialogue, social interaction between people, how that creates opportunities for the people to change their point of view. And as I said earlier, this is really important in the field of social psychology of intergroup relations because there is a big theory called the contact hypothesis proposed in 1954 by Allport, who said that if you have two groups with an antagonistic or conflicting history, if they come into dialogue and contact through certain conditions, this prejudice can be reduced and trust can be built again. So you understand in Cyprus, which is a divided island in two, this kind of communication over the checkpoints that I will discuss later on becomes very important. And what we call genetic social psychology is the effort to understand all these three processes and also their relationship to each other. So, let me give a small overview of what I consider to be a more objective kind of historical account of the Cyprus problem, because In that sense, it has been a bit tested between both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots in various conferences when we presented. And I would say, if we go back to 1955, Cyprus was under the British colonial rule. Then there was a struggle by Greek Cypriots, who were 80% of the island, to ask for union with Greece. This was resisted by the Turkish Cypriot community, that was 18% of the island. And they asked for taksim, which means separation, as we all know, between a Greek part and a Turkish part. No community got what they wanted, actually, because there was the establishment of the independent Republic of Cyprus in the form of a consociational constitution of power sharing between a president, Greek Cypriot president, and a vice president, Turkish Cypriot vice president, with veto powers on some important issues of foreign policy and other issues. So in that sense, obviously, that kind of arrangement needed trust to work. If you ask me, historically, these conditions were not really there at that point because the two communities continued their own struggles. And we had the collapse of the constitution in 1963. We had intercommunal strife. Turkish Cypriots withdrew from the government. They withdrew in enclaves. And that was the first phase of partition in a way, although that was not complete partition. That actually came up in 1974 when the Greek junta in Greece organized a coup against Makarios. Turkey 1 week later invaded or intervened, depending on the narrative, because obviously from the Greek Cypriot perspective it's seen as an invasion, from the Turkish Cypriot perspective it's seen as a peace operation. But this only tells us that, the way history is taught is also very different in the two educational system, which creates different ways of seeing the Cyprus problem and what is a just or an unjust solution to the problem. After the events of 1974 that led to this complete geographical division, Cyprus became divided by the UN patrol buffer zone in the middle. And here we have some empirical evidence of how the two communities saw the consequences, the real consequences of both the 63, 64 and the 74 events. You see a large proportion of people lost properties, became internally displaced, or became refugees. People have been arrested. They lost relatives and loved ones. People went missing. Actually, it's interesting if you look at the percentages here, how comparable they are in terms of having relatives or friends who went missing. About 1/4 of the population, which is really important for a small island like Cyprus. So you understand these events, both 63, 64 and 74, created a lot of collective trauma. That is part of how we want to understand how people negotiate that and what kind of meaning they give in different ages and through time. So, as I said earlier, from a social psychological perspective, we are interested not only to understand, if you like, the tip of the iceberg, which is prejudice between the two communities, and how it changes through time, but also what is the underlying logic of that. And we know from social psychology that there are issues of social identity, issues of forgiveness or not, whether people can take the perspective of the other community or not, whether they feel a sense of realistic or symbolic threat, whether they come to contact or not plays a big role, whether they have trust or not. So this is something really important, and mostly they are organized, as I said earlier, through the way history is taught, because these master narratives are internalized by children in the really young age, and they form a sense of what is a just solution and what is a non-just solution. So, for example, as you know, in 2004, we had a referendum on the Annan Plan, which was accepted by the majority of Turkish Cypriots, but this was rejected by the majority of Greek Cypriots. So in that sense, what people understood as a just solution became very important. And in Cyprus, there is a history of social psychology, but usually it was from the outside, like track two diplomacy efforts to institution that did not lead to any institutionalized local social psychology. So it was people like from Harvard, Barton in London, Dube, Diamond and Fisher, Broom, people who were doing conflict resolution back in the 60s, even during the intercommunal conflict, but they didn't really create any infrastructures locally in Cyprus. But however, they did contribute to the creation of people interested in conflict resolution, a local community of intercommunal people who wanted to build peace. And this was really important. But for social psychology, the real turning point actually came in 2003 with the opening of the checkpoints, because that is what allowed us, this opening of the checkpoints, to really engage with Turkish Cypriot colleagues in Cyprus, do studies together, large-scale representative surveys, comparative studies, to understand the views of both communities about the problem. And what you see here is just a picture of that period when the opening of the checkpoints, the enthusiasm of people to meet old friends, to visit lost properties, that made that a very lively period that unfortunately, as I said earlier, did not lead back then to the solution of the problem. But eventually, it slowly led to opening more and more checkpoints. And today, and despite the division, you can see there are 9 open checkpoints on the UN patrol buffer zone that allow contact between people, allow us as researchers to do research in both sides, to collaborate with our Turkish Cypriot colleagues, and have a good sense of what the views of the two communities are. So if you want a historical trajectory that led to the book and the writing of this theoretical approach, is this conflict resolution period back in the 60s until 90s. Then it's the opening of the checkpoints, creation of new Association for Historical Dialogue and Research, new research, and more recently collaboration with colleagues from politics like Neophytos Loizidis at Warwick that allow an understanding of how these social psychological views influence the design of possible solutions, peace packages, which come closer to politics and the interest of your own department, Zuhal. So this is our lab here. I see Andrea, who is also part of our lab, in the audience today, Andrea Nicolaou, my colleague Rinika Dianaki, Maria Ioannou. Maria is holding the book there. We discussed it in the lab. So to return back to the book and some important ideas, I discussed the role of social relationships, how we build relationships with other people, and the quality of these relationships. And you could say there are some relationships of submission or dominating others. There are relationships where you feel the victim of history or the dominated position, and there is the cooperative position. And the argument in the book is that how we find through education the ways to build these cooperative relationships and avoid the other two. And I describe the kind of consequences this relationship have for world feelings towards other outgroups, whether we want to have contact with other community or not. Our ideological and value correlates. Andrea a lot on the values, that part of the model with her PhD thesis. She can tell you more after she's here, I think. And as I said, in chapter 2, I discuss a lot the educational system, both the Greek Cypriot narrative, the Turkish Cypriot narrative. So for Greek Cypriots, the problem starts in 74 with the Turkish invasion. For Turkish Cypriots, that's more or less the solution of the problem there, and they focus on the victimization of 63-64. And you understand this very conflicting views of history create a lot of problems in trust between the two communities because we don't have a joint or common history today. In the book, also in chapter 5, I discuss genealogical differences between generations when people were born and how their views change. So, for example, I have some complicated mixed models where I disentangle the age effect, the period effect when data were collected, and the cohort when people were born. And just to give you an idea, here you see a graph of prejudice. The higher the feelings are, the more positive the feelings are. The lower the feelings, the more negative. So you see something interesting here. The black line is Turkish Cypriots. The red line is Greek Cypriots. So what you see is the older generations have a big gap in feelings. So older Turkish Cypriots feel much more negative towards Greek Cypriots. Greek Cypriots feel more positive towards Turkish Cypriots. But as the generations go by, you see this convergence around the middle of the neutral. And it's mostly regulated actually by whether people today have contact or not. Those who choose to create friendships and cross to the other side, actually their levels of feelings go higher, more positive feelings. Those who avoid contact and stay on their own side, their levels are negative, stay low. So let's move to some final slides, more political questions to see some of the recent work we did with Neophytos. Recently we had the elections in the north, when Tufaner Hurman got elected. We were seeing the importance of his elections already through a study just 1 week before the elections, because we saw there was a significant shift of Turkish Cypriots away from the idea of two-state solution, and with the bizonal bicommunal federation levels of support still. And you can see that this bizonal bicommunal federation is actually the only model that today again finds support by the majority of Greek Cypriots. So politically speaking, there is no other solution in Cyprus that could actually get support by both communities at the same time. The unitary state is accepted by Greek Cypriots but rejected by Turkish Cypriots. If you take a two-state solution, it's accepted by Turkish Cypriots but rejected by a vast majority of Greek Cypriots. So the only possible solution of compromise is bizonal bicommunal federation, and it's the one agreed by the leaders in 77 and the one supported by a series of UN resolutions through time. You can also have a look at these trends because we collect data of this kind every 2 years since the opening of the checkpoints. So you can see the trends of this of each stance. So this is the status quo, continuation of the status quo. You see here Greek Cypriots. You see there is a lot of discomfort with the status quo, the red line. These are people who reject the status quo. In the Turkish Cypriots, there is a polarization. Half of them rejected, half of them accepted. When we move on to the unitary state, we see it's mostly accepted by Greek Cypriots, but as I said earlier, mostly rejected by Turkish Cypriots. If we move to two-state solution, you see there is a constant rejection through time by 70-80% by Greek Cypriots. In Turkish Cypriots, it's acceptance. It's accepted by a majority. So in that sense, Turkish Cypriots are more pragmatic, accepting both a bizonal bicommunal federation and two states. And that's bizonal bicommunal federation, which I said earlier already, that is accepted by both communities. You see it here. The majority, which is the line that says I accept it, I'm clearly in favor, or even the yellow, this light green line, which says I'm not against it, nor in favor, but I could tolerate it if necessary. So it's a solution of compromise. So essentially, the people who reject federation is only 21% in the Greek Cypriot community. And another interesting pattern here is that after Cramondana failure in 2017, every year there is more and more people who support federation in the Greek Cypriot community. Now, in the Turkish Cypriot community, there is a clear majority, as I said earlier, of accepting federation. And if you add those who can tolerate and live with it, it goes up to 70% or 72%. So that's a very clear majority in both communities. Now, to finish with some more particular and politically relevant findings from our research with Neophytos Loizidis, we ran a conjoint analysis. This is an experiment where you give people particular content to federation. So like variations of the Guterres framework that was discussed in 2017 in Cramondana, and different options that are discussed in political design. And then you can see how people position themselves, what they prefer, if there is a package accepted by both communities, and what's. So we published that in 2022, and we have new findings that I will show you in a bit. So these are the new findings just 6 months ago. Identify at least 3-4 packages that are variations to the Guterres framework that can be accepted by both Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots. And we ran a simulation of referendums, and you see that we have some packages that can be defined here, and there is a web page where you can actually play with these combinations, and you see how much percentage of acceptance there is in the one and the other community and jointly. So to conclude, what are the next steps and what's the relevance of this research for policy making? I think we know today what are the sensitivities of each community and how this can be translated in political design. We know that energy is important in our area of Eastern Mediterranean, and we have a recent research presented recently at the LSE Hellenic Observatory that shows that actually through this conjoint analysis, we can identify some packages where Greek Cypriots are open to collaboration with Turkey in managing together the hydrocarbons issue in the East Med. It's interesting because if you ask them separately without a peace package, Greek Cypriots mostly reject the idea of collaboration with Turkey. But if you put conjoint, in the case of a solution, would you see Turkey being our partner in this hydrocarbons collaboration? The answer is that about 65-68% accept the idea. So this is one of our most important findings that I think are of interest to a Turkish audience or policymakers. So I think I will leave it to here. Thank you, Zuhal, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation. We learned a lot again because, this field research and public opinion poll are helping a lot to understand, actually. And also, I like a lot this intergenerational analysis. I was always finding this analysis only by depending on existing, let's say, the public polls. But these generational differences are also very important. But let's give the floor to our guests because I'm so much speaking. So if you let me to speak, I will speak alone. So the questions, please. If you have questions, please open your microphone and ask your question. Questions?
May I ask?
Yes, please.
Yes. Hello. So thank you very much for this organization. I'm really happy to see that you are somehow teaming up with Charis. I'm sorry, but I don't know how to pronounce your name.
Charis.
Charis, right? Okay. So I've been following Charis's works for a long time now. And by the way, I'm a professor in psychology department, and I'm also somehow related, or my major is also social psychology. I'm sorry, but I'm not that much into that issue. But the question is that I wonder if if you have ever studied something related to or if you ever related clinical psychology to social psychology while studying the conflict between Turkish people in Cyprus and the Greek people in Cyprus. Have you ever, or do you know any study which is mostly focusing on clinical aspects of traumas that they have suffered from? And would you like to say anything about them?
Okay, so the more clinical aspect of this conflict, like the more clinical psychological aspect of it.
Yeah,
Is
yes,
that the question?
yes. You know, the thing is that we usually, I'm not saying that, maybe you have already done it very much. Like we have some kind of conflicts in Turkey as well, and we have conflicts all over the world. Yes, we can somehow study about, you know, in social psychological aspect or political aspect, we are studying on it, or we are studying like in a media aspect, media angle. But I sometimes think that we are somehow ignoring the clinical part of or clinical angle of the conflicts, and we are not going to the people who have suffered from these conflicts, and we're not talking about their traumas, how they have been impacted by these like conflicts, their traumas, and how these traumas did not allow them to communicate or contact with other groups, like you know, in the
Yeah.
Cyprus and Greek Cyprus as well.
Yeah. Okay, Kamel. First, it's very nice to see you. I remember we talked once over Messenger, Zoom, but we're gonna have the chance to work together until today. And I was very interesting to find out you were working together in the same university with
Yeah,
Zuhal,
and
but
that's
you
why I'm
didn't know
very
each
happy
other.
that really Zuhal
Yeah.
just, you know, invited you. Really, it's an
Yeah.
honor for us, I think. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
But no, that's really an important question. To be honest, there is not a lot of research from clinical psychologists in Cyprus
Yeah.
about the trauma of 74.
Mm.
And that definitely needs to happen. A good colleague, Alexandros Lordos, who is combining insights from clinical psychology to conflict resolution. And I can send you his email. He's working on various conflicts around the world, combining clinical psychology with conflict resolution
Yeah.
and community building and resilience. So I will definitely bring you to contact with him if that's something you're
Yeah.
interested.
That
But
will be
let
great.
me answer something that
Yeah.
relates to our own research, what I discovered. I discovered because we always measure the people direct and indirect influence. As you saw earlier, I had a table
Yeah.
asking, whether they lost property, whether they lost
Yeah. I
relatives.
saw them. Yeah.
Yeah, so you could actually correlate this kind of variables with their attitudes toward the Cyprus issue. And one of my most interesting findings was the following, that these kind of correlations were very low actually towards how to solve the problem or whether they have hatred in them. So that was a bit counterintuitive because there is this idea in political sciences that, who who lost properties, who are refugees, might have more hatred in them. Actually, that was not the case. We published a paper with Neophytos Loizidis where we found exactly the opposite thing, that in the Greek Cypriot community, the internally displaced people were more ready to support a compromise solution and
Mm.
move towards a federation. So that was interesting. What was much more directly linked to having negative views and distrust, as I said earlier, was the internalization of the collective trauma. So not
Mm.
the individual experience, is whether I believe what I learned through schools as the collective trauma, whether that's true or not. That was a far bigger predictor of prejudice and distrust towards the other community. So in other words, if you want to predict someone's prejudice, a much better predictor is to ask him, do you believe what your history textbooks writes about the story of the conflict or not? If they agree fully, then you will be almost certain they are prejudiced against the other group, and don't ask them about whether they lost property or not, because that would be not so helpful. So that's my short answer.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Charis. It's very nice to see your answer. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Alexander wants, yes.
Yes, Hocam. Good evening from Greece. I would like to thank as well Chris Psaltis. To be honest, we are not from the social science point of view, but we are from the business-oriented community, and we would like to have some comments for anything which is going to improve the relation between the two mother countries and the two communities in Cyprus. My question is referred if we have some segmental analysis from the Turkish Cypriot side concerning the age of the population of the sample and as well the birth point of the sample. For example, what is going to be the acceptance between the Turkish settlers, even if I believe in Greece we have given too much importance for the division between the local Turkish Cypriot and the population transported from mainland Turkey. To be honest, it's overestimated, this division, according to my opinion. But if we have some real data which is going to support if there is any different point of view between the local Turkish Cypriot and the people which more or less moved from Turkey or the second generation Turkish Cypriot. And my actual question, I'm living in Kavala, very close to Thrace. We have the Turkish Muslim minority community in Komotini, Xanthi, Sketche, Mulgina. Anyway, the only thing which is we are missing, even if we have good relations in business, is what is going to be the proportion of intermarriage in between Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot? There is no any, how can I say, even if in the days we can mix our lives, it is very, very difficult to find some common aspects in cultural, in religious part of the population which is going to support further integration and rehabilitation of trauma. To be honest, I don't know the Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot. I cannot judge if, for example, you ask Dogus Derya or Senevel Levent, you can get some different point of view from the average Turkish Cypriot population. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandre. These are very interesting questions and very important questions also. Well, let me start by saying that we examined this comparison within the Turkish Cypriot community because if you study the views of the Turkish Cypriot community today, and usually in our studies, we have a filter question in the beginning, which is, do you have the right to vote? So that makes us interested in a way in the views of those people who, if we move to a referendum tomorrow, will be voting and their opinion will be taken into account. This is our criterion. So who have a politically valid view on the future of this island. So in that sense, in that sample, in the north, there is about 35% of people who originated from Turkey, either first generation or second generation. So that allows us to do a more internal comparison also of the views within the Turkish Cypriot community, and I can answer your question. I do agree with your evaluation that this difference is usually overestimated in Greece and the Greek Cypriot community. Because our research evidence, and you can find that in a published paper I can send you if you send me an email, is that in most of the issues, there is not such a big difference. There is some difference relating to the lack of contact, a lower level of trust. And that has an explanation. On the basis of what I mentioned earlier about the role of contact in reducing trust, we know, for example, that the Greek Cypriots do not allow the people who originated from Turkey to cross to the south because they are considered non-legal settlers. That's the term the Greek Cypriots use. So in that sense, they are not allowed to cross, so they have diminished opportunities of contact with the people in the south. So that creates for them, leaves them with higher levels of distrust. But beyond that, I mean, in the views about the solution, there is not such a big difference actually. Although my colleagues in the Turkish department here tell me there are also important internal differentiations of where they come from, whether they are Alevites, Kurdish, Kurdish origin. So it might be a bit more complicated if you go into it much more, but I didn't have the chance to do that more detailed analysis. But generally speaking, you know, I think we have seen it also in the recent elections in the north of Tufan Erkurman. He attracted a lot of the voters of people of Turkish origin. And he got elected on a platform of, you know, a different model, not a two-state model, but a bizonal bicommunal federation model. So what does that tell you? You know, that there are also a lot of Turkish Cypriots of Turkish origin who actually want to support bizonal bicommunal federation, and we have seen that in our research. I think you also had another question, Alexandre.
Yes, speaking about the actual opportunities for rehabilitation of trauma and let's say more opportunities to offer more opportunities in the two communities to get in touch. But the actual situation from my experience from the local Turkish Muslim minority in Thrace is that there is very, very minimum contacts. For example, we can dealing with them in our professional lives. We can doing with them in, let's say, in some institutional based affairs, but there is no real, how can I say, now the young generation during the school time, okay, can overcome this problem, let's say until 18, 19 years old. For example, I have a friend from Pila, Turkish Cypriot girl from Pila. She told me as well, we have two different types of lives. We have our mosque, they have their own church. We have our own cemeteries, they have their own. We have our own schools, they have their own coffee shops. Actually, even if it's a mixed village, the Pila and Bergama, you cannot find many real opportunities for joint activities between the two communities. And as I told, even the intermarriage percentage, do you have any information?
Yeah, the intermarriage. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Now I
from
remember.
different division,
Okay.
yes, religious-based communities, for example.
So let me answer the intermarriage question. There are not so many intermarriages in Cyprus also. I know a few people, young couple that got married recently, actually last few years after the opening of the checkpoints, but it's not a widespread phenomenon. I think what is more important though, beyond intermarriage, because I think in intermarriage also the issue of religion gets in. You know, somehow the families and religious difference. But I think what is more important in our case, and it's been studied a lot in social psychology, is the establishment of friendships. And in Cyprus, we have seen an exponential increase of friendships after the opening of the checkpoints. So let me give you some numbers. Just after the opening of the checkpoints, very low friendships in both communities. But 10 years after, we had about 25% of Greek Cypriots and about 40% of Turkish Cypriots reporting they had at least one friend from the other community. And today, if you see the numbers, it's about 35% of Greek Cypriots having at least one friend from the other community, and about 60% of Turkish Cypriots having at least one friend from the Greek Cypriot community. And this is very important from the contact hypothesis perspective, because friendship creates the optimal conditions for the reduction of prejudice and building trust. And to go to your question about Bila, we actually tested comparisons between Bila and the rest of Cyprus. And in Bila, trust was significantly higher compared to the rest of Cyprus. So again, we find they might have different churches and coffee shops and things like that, but the fact that they live together in the same village and they see each other every day and they have some friendships, that actually leads to reduced levels of prejudice compared to the rest of Cyprus.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Do we have another question? Maybe a last question, if we have. Please open your microphone and ask if you have. If not, I will continue and use this opportunity. I have a question, the last question for you, not to make you more tired. We had a PhD thesis at our department about the perception, especially in politicians in Greek Cypriot parliament, how they perceive each other, and this kind of thesis the student prepared through the Zoom program because it was COVID time. So in this interviews, we were watching some very open-minded, let's say, segment of the politics and people from this segment were not answering the question, do you have any friend from the Turkish Cypriot side? They say no. And they were old generation. And we were always thinking that the old generation knows how to live together. So that knowledge is very important, you know, having a kind of common life. So they are now dying because of, you know, the age and years are passing. And what I learn now is something very important. So is it correct to say that this knowledge of living together is not something very unique, and we can construct, we can, let's say, build a new way of living together through this rising contacts between this younger generation? Is it the argument in your presentation?
Yeah, we published one paper, Zuhal, in Political Psychology, the journal Political Psychology, from a study that we collected data from the formerly 114 mixed villages that existed in Cyprus in 1960. And we asked these people of their past relationships, their current relationships, today in separation, and what kind of future they want for Cyprus, what kind of solution. And in that paper, if you read the paper, you will see that there is an important finding. Those who had contact in the past, it carries over to positive feelings today. Those who did not have in the past, who are in more segregated spaces in that way, but have contact today, can reach at similar and comparable levels of positive feelings towards the other community. So in other words, what you lost from the past, you can make it up now, as you said.
So thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation. We learned a lot again from the field, live, and very important informations. Thanks for this opportunity by accepting our invitation.
Yes, and thank you for the invitation again. Thank you.
It is wonderful to host you and all the guests participating to our discussions. Hope to see you in another MURCIR activity. Please join us and please contribute us. Please bring some new project ideas. We will be happy to cooperate. Thanks again.
We'll be happy to invite you to present to our students your own research. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
By the way, as we are speaking about the common activities, so how next week, Thursday, in Greek Consulate in Istanbul, we have common event which is supported by the Greek Consulate General, Mr. Koutras, about the population exchange from Cappadocia and Kavala. I will send you a personal invitation. If you are free, you are more welcome to join with us.
Thank you very much. You are always so kind. And thanks again, and see you in the next event. Have a nice day. Loves from Istanbul.